Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So I'm joining you today in my pajamas. I didn't really want to put clothes on, so I'm not going to. That's what stage we're at right now. Okay, let's just jump right in here because I've got a lot of really long and quite specific questions. Hi Olivie, I was wondering if you had any advice on navigating a majority white college organization / team as a minority. I was actually really thinking about this recently where my main experience is as being the only or one of the few minorities in the room. So I was in a sorority and I think a lot of sororities are pretty much under fire right now for not being very diverse. I didn't notice that because my sorority was diverse. Or I felt it was anyway. But I definitely noticed that there were houses that weren't. Like I felt very, very uncomfortable when I was going through recruitment and I would walk into a house that was full of blondes. Also, the way we went through recruitment was that 3 of the house's members would step forward out of the house and they were the first faces basically to be seen. And so it was very noticeable when 3 blondes walked out. It just kind of left me with this sort of strange feeling. Formal recruitment is not the greatest thing in the world, but kind of figuring out how we decided who was going to be in those positions it made me feel very not white. It made me very aware of my not whiteness, but luckily the sorority I was in did not make me feel like an outsider for that. But I'm sure there were houses that did. Anyway. So I've been in one for the past year and only now have I started to think about this sense of otherness or isolation I always felt. Like they were so white. I didn't really experience racism and I wasn't outrightly made to feel marginalized, but I often felt like I couldn't keep up with them and I often didn't understand some of the stuff they'd say, like cultural things, even though I'm born and raised in the US and have had around the same financial advantages most of them have had. I still wonder how much of what I felt was due to it being a race thing and how much of it was because I felt inadequate. I was a freshman and not on the competitive team. It was mock trial. Anyway, I'm super confused and I'll probably be interacting with them a lot more in the coming months. And even though we've had diversity training this year, I have no idea how to deal with it mentally because it seems to me to be an internal thing. Any thoughts? Yeah, I agree with you that there were only certain moments where I'd be like, ooh, that's really white. Or this is just something I don't relate to. I remember that people would act very strangely when they would find things out I'd never had s'mores before. And I would say, well, s'mores is kind of a white people thing. And they'd be like, well, I think of it as a camping thing. And I'd be like, well, camping is kind of a white people thing too, because I don't like to be uncomfortable in the dirt. And that was just my sort of internal thing that was like, why are you acting like it's weird that I've never had this thing or done this activity that why, we don't hide in the woods. That's not something that we aspire to. I'm joking. And then also at Thanksgiving, I didn't have a lot of the traditional Thanksgiving foods that we would get served. I had never had stuffing before and had no idea what it was. I was like, is this really just bread? Is this bread? Because, we would have mixed in with our American foods, we'd have more traditional Filipino foods, stuff that they had never heard of. And so there were moments when I'd feel like maybe I'm just not going to talk about this, or, they would talk about their childhoods and it would just feel really different from mine. Some of the people who were in my sorority would make a joke about the whole Asian parent thing being really intense. But I never really wanted to make a joke of it. I always felt a little bit defensive of my upbringing. I wasn't forced into these stereotypical activities, but my grades and my academics and all this were really valued. When I was a kid, my mom always told me that there was no point having any domestic skills because if I just did well in school and I got a good job, then I would just pay for someone to do these things for me. Ultimately, that meant I didn't know how to do anything in my life, but, I get where she was coming from. This idea that someone else can be paid to do this for you if you just succeed and you work your way up. And that was kind of her attitude. And it's just stuff like that where it's that might be more ethnic or cultural than race, but it all kind of comes back to the same thing. If you consider that race is just phenotype and it's all just part of, it's the social construct, then yeah, the way that you grew up, the thoughts that you have are related in some way to the way that you face the world, either as a result of how people treat you or Well, definitely that. And also what sort of qualities you have as a result of the ones your family has. So how do you deal with this? For one thing, this is definitely a time when you're probably more aware of racial microaggressions than you have ever been before, because it's acceptable now to talk about them. That is kind of the great thing about the Black Lives Matter movement and the idea that we're actually analyzing the way that we exist in the world, and also reacting how white people are reacting to this as well, whether or not they're questioning themselves. The discussion about, earlier this summer about Karens was very interesting to watch white women react to this, because there is a line between white and intersectional feminism. Also looking at the discourse surrounding, J.K. Rowling's whole thing, it's like this idea of like, okay, so we're all this one minority, but how we're addressing that is really different. And I think everybody's colors are starting to show. When I was in college, I'm sure that there were Republicans in my sorority house, and if we had ever had a discussion about politics at the time, which we didn't need to because they weren't as divisive, I think I probably would have been unsettled to learn what people probably thought, because a lot of them come from wealthy families in Southern California, like Orange County, which is now like exploding. At the time, I didn't really have to question this. I could just exist alongside them. There was no real... there were moments when the way that we were told to dress, or the way that we were told to do our hair, or how to do our makeup, or which parts of our faces to accentuate, that if I were looking back at it now, if I were me as now in that position, I think I would have said something like, these are crazy positions to take. Like, you can't decide that all of our beauty is going to be judged on like a white standard of beauty. So I guess the first step is just to say it's not as internal as you think. It's hard to continually point out to people when they're being racist, especially because that, depending on how they take it, that might turn into like a really uncomfortable conversation, because they might get really defensive. Some people are so afraid of being called racist that they hate that more than actual racism. So that's something you might encounter. And depending on how bad it is or how much it actually affects you, you might want to correct those behaviors, or that might just be asking too much. So, that's on you to figure out, especially if you're having, I think you said like a diversity training, this might be, it would be really not uncommon for them to all of a sudden turn to you and be like, what do you think? And you're like, I can't speak for all ethnicities. I can only speak for my personal experience, and that can be a lot of pressure to put on you. So, if you can find one other non-white person to sort of commiserate with about this, I think honestly, having like a rant friend is very important. Someone who understands that you just need to get it off your chest, and you just need to say, this thing happened, and maybe it wasn't a big enough deal for me to like raise hell over it. Some things are going to be a big deal that you maybe should bring up, especially if it's mock trial. You probably have the tools to argue in your favor. You have the ability to advocate for yourself. Is it going to be necessary every single time? Probably not. There's only so many times that you can make things clear to people, or try to make things clear to people. And it is a great emotional burden on you to try to correct someone else's prejudice. So I just want to say that I understand that, first of all, that you might not want to do that. It's probably not good for your mental health. But I do think that there will be allies, not in the sort of grand sense that they're going to take your burden and solve racism for you, but they'll at least be able to see the same thing you're seeing and confirm you're not crazy, that really did happen, that microaggression was real. What's really important is having the confirmation that something, that you're not being like gaslit by other people who are all pretending like a certain behavior is normal, and you might want to think a little bit more about what these things are. Like, you might have an idea what they are, and you just didn't have enough characters to bring it up to me. But you might want to think about why at this moment do I feel so conscious of the fact that I'm not white? What am I doing? What are they doing? And I think taking stock of that might help you to figure out what the larger behavior pattern is, and maybe that's something that can be corrected. If it's the culture of the organization, it probably is in your best interest to try to change something. I mean, obviously, if you're in mock trial, then this is something that's important to you, and enacting this sort of change, persuading people to see the world the way you see it is like worth doing. Being able to have a place, a safe space where you can say like, this is how I feel because of this. You know, if you're on a college campus, you could always talk to like a counselor or something they have like, you know, therapists, usually that are in school and that will see students for free. So you could always take advantage of that if you don't want to do this to a friend. But I think what you want to avoid is the feeling lonely, because I think part of what makes it so hard to be sort of like, I don't want to say victimized, but kind of, you know, is feeling like you're the only person who's seeing it and wondering if it's real. So yeah, I would definitely say like, hopefully there's at least one other person who can see what you're seeing. You know, they don't have to be a person of color as well. They might just be a white person who can observe it and who understands that you need someone to talk to about it. I'm thinking a lot of the show Insecure, when Issa Rae's character was like the only Black woman in this sort of all white environment where they kind of looked to her as the token minority voice, but she didn't feel like they were on her side in the end. I think if you find yourself in that position, it's the organization that's the problem. If it's individuals, then you need to find yourself some allies. You know, people who you feel safe enough talking about what you're going through. Unfortunately, you might have to get used to this because real law school is predominantly quite white as well. Being a lawyer means facing a lot of white lawyers and a lot of white cops. And unfortunately, the infrastructure of justice is quite whitewashed. So on the one hand, it might be worth getting used to this. But on the other, you don't have to just roll over and take it. It is probably best if you just start to learn what those behaviors are so that you can either correct them where you can or find a way to spend your life correcting them. Hello, Olivie. I have asked you multiple questions before and always gotten wise answers, so I turn to you once more for guidance. So I'm Scandinavian, and I made an American friend last year when I studied abroad in Asia. Now, I knew this friend was Catholic, but I didn't think too much about it. But in a recent conversation, it came to light that he is anti-Black Lives Matter, against abortion, and thinks pretty much all LGBTQ plus people are sinful or psychologically ill. Okay, so this is not a commonly held Catholic belief. I just want to open with that because I am Catholic. Usually fundamental Christians, like non-denominational or Protestants, they fall into the more conservative category because so many Catholics are not white. Okay, this obviously disturbed and shocked me. I'm honestly not sure how to deal with it. I'm back home now, so it's not like I have to see him every day or anything like that. It's more like if I ever go back to the town where I studied abroad, I always figured I'd go visit him. Now I'm not so sure. The thing is, and I'm not trying to justify his views in any way or form, he is intelligent, is he? And funny, is he? And there's a reason we became friends, but my beliefs are the complete opposite of his. Yeah, because his beliefs are generally anti-human life. Can you stay friends with someone like that? I don't know if you can tell, but I don't know why you would ever be friends with this person. First of all, if he's anti-Black Lives Matter, he's racist. If he's anti-abortion, he's probably a misogynist. I was actually reading in this book that I have here, Too Much. So the protracted but ever vicious reproductive rights debate asks whether a woman is sovereign of her body. Is she free? Is she reasonable enough to treat it as she sees fit? And should that freedom be circumscribed depending on circumstances? And for that matter, how should the body feel to the woman living in it? A man who's against abortion is almost certainly misogynistic in other ways. Okay, so we're up to the not caring about Black lives, not caring about female lives, and doesn't care about queer lives either. What are you doing? I don't care how funny he is. This is not a matter of cultural difference either. This is not a commonly held American belief. So, okay, calm down, tone it down. I can't help but wonder if it's like a little entitled of me to think that he doesn't deserve to be my friend. What do you think friendship is based on? Do you think that it's just based on like how they treat you? because I feel like it should potentially be more than that. I think that a shared belief system is important, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to agree on everything. But should you be friends with someone, like, your friendship means expending energy on someone. Do you want to spend that energy on someone who potentially doesn't really even think you have value? So usually you only talk to people who think the way you do, which is why everything gets so polarized, especially on the internet. Somehow I can't help but find this a little fascinating. I mean, yes, social media it's an echo chamber where, like, you follow people who have beliefs you do, so you hear those same beliefs. But I don't think his beliefs are, I don't think they're contributing anything to your life. Okay, so while I despise it, I also think it's kind of interesting. It's like this guy's like the human devil's advocate. Do we need that? Should that be rewarded? Should that be celebrated? Can you be friends with someone so different from yourself? Why? You don't have to get along with this person. You don't even live in the same place. You're not going to get wisdom from me here because I don't see it. I don't know what the ultimate goal would be. I mean, generally, friendship in adulthood is like hard to maintain. It takes some effort. So you could spend that effort on someone whose beliefs reflect a larger belief that who you are and what you believe matters. The thing is, it's not fascinating. It isn't. It's reflective of a very, very damaging worldview. And maybe because there are no stakes for you because you're Scandinavian and you come from somewhere where like your policy actually reflects a value of human life. But this guy is an American, and as an American, I can tell you that this is a man who this is a Trump voter. I guess all I have to say is that there's nothing interesting to me about this. All this is generations of prejudice that this person can't think for himself enough to decide. This is just the perpetuation of probably his parents' beliefs, or, somewhere grosser like Reddit. And yes, there is something to be said about not believing the same things of other people. But that's like, being friends with people who like jazz music or are really into impressionism, and you can have conversations about those sort of differences, or they have different hobbies, or they think professional sports are great and you don't. Like that, having different perspectives is important, having different interests. Yes. Do you really want to sit down and have a conversation with someone in your life about whether human life is valuable, or if women have a right to decide what happens to their bodies? Those are the kind of conversations that I don't think bring value to your life. But that is your choice. I just don't think you can assume that like this is not one person's interesting opinion. This is an institutionally biased opinion that a lot of our most problematic laws are based in. And the perpetuation of this guy's beliefs bring nothing to the conversation, except for old, tired beliefs full of hatred and prejudice and just a fundamental lack of compassion or understanding. And if you find value there, I think that can only speak to your privilege of not having to deal with the results of his beliefs. Okay. I hated that one. Okay. Okay, so this is doubtless going to be long and likely a little indecipherable. I'm sorry. Such is life. I came across one of your old asks where you said that people are more inclined to forgive or love morally gray characters if they're male. And I've noticed that in the past I've done that. However, where I was going with this was, as I'm in the very early and painful stages of planning a thing that has a main point, a female character who not only is morally gray but also a very strong leader, traits that are honestly a little difficult to sort out and coexistent. Okay, so basically, if she's a woman who's a strong leader, that probably means that she's like ambitious and, focused and maybe bossy. All things that people don't like women to be generally. Plus being a soldier and with lingering childhood trauma. And so the point of all this necessary information is, do you have any tips or advice for writing morally gray women who are capable of human emotion? Necessary caveat, I'm not implying that morally gray women are not capable of human emotion, just that the few who are presented in media are usually just there to assist the main villain and be creepy, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay, yeah, so when a woman is morally gray, she usually gets punished for it. Like, what's her name on Game of Thrones? I was probably talking about nobility because a lot of people had trouble with the woman who is ambitious. There's another woman who does sort of ambiguous things in the story, but her like driving factor is love, essentially. It's kind of more acceptable to the audience that a woman having the emotions of, I need to save the person I love, that's very commonly rewarded, versus the other character a lot of people didn't like because her motivation was, I'm the best person for this job, the job of queen. So her position is purely ambition, and that's acceptable in a man. A man can decide, I'm the right person for this job, and he can have it, and that's accepted, because that is a strong leadership quality in a man. But in a woman, for her to just want it is like unacceptable. And I think your kind of best method for combating this, most people are not going to question themselves, so you might want to have someone there who like questions the character so that she can defend herself. This may not work, people might not buy into it, but I think the idea is that this character, you know, ambitious female characters should be sympathetic to us, but they aren't because so many of us have had our own ambitions squashed. There are going to be people who dislike your morally gray female character because that's not what women are supposed to want. I think, I remember I talked to a guy after someone I went to high school with when I was in college, and he kind of congratulated me on sort of chilling out. Like I'd finally learned to be more chill, by which he meant that I didn't insert my opinion as much, or I, you know, didn't get as angry about things, or if you think about it, that means that I was like slightly robbed of parts of my personality, but he was congratulating me on it because I was much more palatable that way. I actually recently had a conversation with someone about this one character's right to be a dick, a female character, and I felt the same thing here where I was being told to like make her, the word likable was not used, but that was essentially the idea, that I was being told, let's make her more palatable so that she's not just a killjoy in the whole book. But I've had to fight several times now for her prerogative to be a dick, you know, like that's just her right. Like if she were a man, if she were a male character, and especially because this is a woman of color, the fact that she is not helpless, the fact that she will not be silenced is her right, you know? And so I think part of it is that you fight for this sort of representation to exist, and that you don't make apologies for it. But you do have to understand that there are going to be people who want her to make apologies for it, or they want evidence of humanity, as in evidence of softness and or love, because romantic love is like the only thing that can redeem a female character, basically, or something that revolves around, you know, her job of becoming a wife and a mother someday. So, you know, how do you deal with that? There's going to be a presumed lack of complexity, which is really just a lack of stereotypical female behaviors. So yeah, so this is really two parts. You write the female character exactly as she is. But if you're going to have to deal with how people are going to react to her, you have to be ready to defend her. And you might have to write in a scene where she defends herself. That might work or it might not. There are still plenty of people who dislike the character in Nobility because she didn't make any apologies. And people hate that. But maybe they need to see that. So yeah, I think you need to decide what morally gray means, because that's only one characteristic. You're applying it to a larger archetype of female characters, of characters in general. This is something that is like, it's very popular to play with right now. But I think that ultimately what happens is that the decision makers, people who work in publishing or who work in entertainment, kind of put a foot down and say, this woman, like, she's not sympathetic. She's not sympathetic to a white heteronormative cis male opinion. And therefore, there's something wrong with her and we have to change something. We have to make her more likable. This is something you're going to run into all the time. And sometimes it's not going to have anything to do with the way you built the character, but just people who are not ready for her to exist unapologetically as a character who does not have traditional female qualities like compassion, mercy, like motherhood. If she's not self-sacrificing, people don't understand how she can be a woman at the same time. You know, like how can we root for this woman if she wouldn't give up her life for her children? It's a mystery. And so it's really that two-part of how do you write her? The same way you write any character, which is you build her like a real person. She responds in a real way. So I'm talking about my ambitious character. At every given opportunity, even when she does show mercy, she only does it when she's figured out how to position it so that now what she's done has provided her leverage. So she is very self-serving, which is the opposite of what people want a woman to be, and the opposite of the other female character. I'm kind of been, like, Nobility has the same concept as Awe of the Night Approaching, which was sort of my expanded version of Nobility's original concept. And in this book, you know, I've been very aware of the fact that my female character kind of refuses, she identifies when she could make a choice in someone else's favor. And then she sort of doubles back and thinks, when has anyone ever done that for me? When has a man ever done that for me? When would a man in my position choose his own interests? You know, would he be expected to do XYZ? And sometimes, you know, I think sometimes peeling back that layer of exposition can help you justify her behaviors. But yeah, this isn't so much a writing question, of like, how do you craft her, and more of a, how do you justify her to the people who are inevitably going to see what she's doing as fundamentally bad because it's fundamentally unfeminine. And that's another question. That's a separate question that I think you, first of all, have to answer for yourself, and you have to be prepared to answer for yourself many, 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 many times over. But, you know, that's just something that not a lot of women are necessarily aware of, their own internal biases. This is really a time of checking your internal bias and realizing that the things you think are not objectively true. They're just what you've been trained to think. And this is true of racism and sexism and all of these things that, you know, this experience that you've probably had and other people have had, and people have told you, no, it's just in your head. You have to sit with that. And the people who are reading your book are going to have to sit with that as well. And they might not sit quietly with it, and they might not sit thoughtfully with it. But I think you just have to worry about, does everything that your character does make sense based on how you built them? Not does it make people like them, or will it make them more sympathetic, but does it follow the trajectory you set for them? Their foundational quality, does this action support that is their main belief? So yeah, that's really the hard part, is how you validate your character, how you do it for yourself, and how you sort of prepare to do it for your audience. This was a lot, so we can talk more about it next week if you want. But anyway, this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.